All right, for weeks right here on this program, we have been demanding answers about who knew what and when about the surveillance of President Trump, candidate Trump, and of course members of his transition team. Also tonight, we appear to have a very important key piece of this very complex puzzle. Now, Fox's own Adam Housley, he's going to join us in a few minutes with a full report. He is revealing that, quote, the unmasked names of people associated with Donald Trump were then sent to all of those at the National Security Council and some at the Defense Department, then Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, and then CIA Director John Brennan, essentially the officials at the top, including former Rice Deputy Ben Rhodes. Now, this proves the surveillance was widespread, and it was known by a lot of people, and there's more. Intel sources now tell Sarah Carter with Circa News, who will also join us tonight, that the unmasking of names connected with the Trump team, quote, appeared to begin last July, around the time that Trump secured the GOP nomination, and accelerated after Trump's election in November, launched a transition that continued through January. Now, Circa News is also reporting that most, if not all, had nothing to do with Russia. And that's not all tonight. Eli Lake with Bloomberg View, who will also join us tonight, reported today, quote, one U.S. official familiar with the report said they contained valuable political information on the Trump transition team, such as whom the Trump team was meeting, the views of Trump associates on foreign policy matters, and plans for the incoming administration. And just 2 weeks ago, Susan Rice, she was specifically asked during an interview on PBS if she knew about members of the Trump team being caught up in, quote, incidental surveillance. She says no. Watch this.
I began by asking about the allegations leveled today by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes that Trump transition officials, including the president, may have been swept up in surveillance of foreigners at the end of the Obama administration.
I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that count today.
Oh, really? I know nothing about that? Well, that's what you just heard her say. Was she lying in that clip? Well, new reports today indicate yes. Yes, she was. Now, keep in mind, this new information about Susan Rice comes on the heels of the smoking gun tape that was uncovered last week that we played on the program of former Obama official Dr. Evelyn Farkas admitting not only surveillance took place, but the names were also unmasked and they wanted them leaked. Now, tonight we are demanding answers to these questions. You American people, you now have a right to know. For example, what justification did Susan Rice have to unmask these names? That's pretty unprecedented. What did Ben Rhodes know? What did the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, know? What did the former CIA Director, John Brennan, know? Was this done for pure political purposes, under the ruse of national security? And more importantly, what did then President Obama know, and when did he know it? Did President Obama and members of his administration, did they knowingly surveil an opposition party or an incoming president? America deserves answers tonight.
National Security Advisor Susan Rice have access to an unmasked U.S. citizen's name.
Any other National Security Advisor would, I think, as a matter of their ordinary course of their business.
I was not aware of any orders given to disseminate that kind of information, so I have no idea whether that was the case.
Does the White House believe Susan Rice may have done anything illegal?
I'm not going to start going down that road. There's a troubling direction that some of this is going in, but we're going to let this review and go on.
I can't say whether anything was masked or unmasked improperly, and the White House seems to be doing everything it can to point in other directions and say, do not look here, there is nothing to see here.
Oh, but there's plenty to see here. One of the biggest stories of the already eventful Trump presidency, perhaps of this decade, with Fox News confirming President Obama's National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, ordered the unmasking of her successor, retired General Mike Flynn, in coded intelligence reports that she was receiving through U.S. surveillance on foreign targets. That highly classified information was then leaked by whom, we don't yet know, to the news media, ultimately costing Flynn his job and possibly more trouble to come. Ahead of these disclosures, which were first reported by Mike Cernovich, an independent journalist, then by Eli Lake of Bloomberg View, with others, including our own Adam Housley in Los Angeles, and yours truly contributing. President Trump was on Twitter posting Sunday morning, and I quote, "The real story turns out to be surveillance and leaking. Find the leakers." Our panel, I'm pleased to tell you, will do that right here on set right now. Guy Benson is political editor at townhall.com. A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Friends all. Molly, should we be surprised to find Susan Rice at the center of this story?
You know, ever since Devin Nunes came out and talked about that there was this unmasking and dissemination, I sort of assumed it would be someone much lower level. This, and also not someone within the White House. This is not a minor flunky. This is Obama's right-hand woman. This makes it from an already pretty serious allegations into something much bigger.
A.B., where does the story go from here, do you think?
Well, it's important to remind the viewers, as I often do, I think I did 2 weeks ago, that although people want to confuse the two, unmasking is not leaking, unmasking is not wiretapping, unmasking is not surveillance. And so while Devin Nunes lied about this, President Trump lied about this, Susan Rice lied about this, and this revelation about Susan Rice could be anything from a scandal to a crime. We have to find that should be a separate investigation. Who leaked it? Was the unmasking that she did in fact legal? Eli Lake's piece said it might have been legal. But really, that is different from an allegation that President Obama ordered wiretapping. So it's not actually a story. It's about two separate things, and there might be two separate wrongs. But unmasking is not wiretapping, and it is not leaking. It is the leaking that is the problem, and that's a crime.
We don't have time here to parse out all of the lies you just described to official Washington, but what was the lie you're saying that Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee,
He lied
told?
to Wolf Blitzer and to Eli Lake about his sources. Everyone at home can look it up. He lied to both those people.
That's unfair. I think he was talking about the White House confirming.
He said he had an intelligence. He said he had an IC source. He did not. He had a White House source who brought him to that stuff.
So you can prove the negative, that in addition to the White House officials who allowed him on the ground, he did not have an intelligence community source. You can prove that.
Eli Lake wrote a column busting Nunes the following day. He has ruined his credibility on this issue. Susan Rice ruined her credibility a long time ago, and she lied about this 10 days ago. I'm saying that what Susan Rice probably did is definitely worth an investigation. It is not the same as talking about wiretapping.
Here is what one prominent senator from, well, I guess he caucuses with the Democrats, but I think he's an independent, Senator Angus King of Maine, had to say about all of this.
That really obscures the much, much larger issue of what did the Russians do in our campaign? How did they do it? Was there a relationship with one or the other of the campaigns?
So is that the real big story, Guy Benson?
It is one of the big stories, but not the only one. And this is the line that we've heard from Democrats and their allies for weeks now, which is there's only one thing that matters, and that's Russia. And what did Russia do? What did they not do? I believe that is an important question to have resolved and ought to be checked out very thoroughly. But they've simultaneously argued the questions about leaks, these new questions about unmasking. Why was Susan Rice asking for this unmasking to take place? I think it's a lot harder to argue now that that's sort of a side story, a side tale that we shouldn't really pay much attention to. I disagree.
Chairman Nunes has said for the record that if you review, which of course not many of us will have the opportunity to do, but if one reviews this paperwork, this paper trail around these intelligence reports and the names that were unmasked, the context of these reports, that it leaves no explicable purpose for the unmasking other than to try to damage the incoming Trump administration. Here's what we heard today via Twitter from Ben Rhodes, the former deputy national security advisor under Susan Rice at the Obama White House. He said they will always try to make story of Russia interfering to help Trump about anything other than Russia interfering to help Trump. Won't work. Charles, will it work or won't it work, or is that what they're doing?
Well, a lot of the media are playing along with it, but it's not going to work because you have to ask yourself, where does Rhodes or Senator King get the divine authority to decide what is the issue and what's not the issue? There are several issues. The Russian intervention obviously is an issue, and it's simply cheap, and I think it's simply not credible to say this other story is just a smokescreen. Clearly, there was some improprieties in the gathering of information about the Trump people. There probably was a felony committed in the leaking of the information about General Flynn. The story today about Susan Rice is, well, if she did order, or if she did allow herself to go in and then to unmask all these people, The question is this: was it in pursuit of national security interests, in which case it's proper, or was it not, in which case it's improper, possibly illegal? That's an important story, because you don't want to have, look, it could be the reverse 4 years or 8 years from now, one party that controls the intelligence apparatus and gets the information, using the information as a weapon against the other party. This is an issue that, until this election campaign, was one about privacy and the misuse of power that Democrats would have argued, but now they are pretending it's not an issue. It is an issue. There are several. The idea that there can only be one at a time is simply silly and partisan.
Molly.
Even the issue of legality is something of a red herring for a couple of different reasons. When you look at Watergate, the big scandal wasn't that a robbery took place. Robberies take place all the time. Burglary took place. Those take place all the time. The issue was spying on political opponents, and that is what concerns American people. The other issue is that civil libertarians have actually been concerned about precisely this type of legal practice that actually violates civil liberties of people under our rules regarding surveillance. And you have the very same people who claim to care about these things suddenly not claiming when we're actually seeing evidence of it happening.
In fairness to Susan Rice, we want to play a little bit of what she had to say for herself when she was asked a little over 10 days ago on PBS about published reports that she and her colleagues in the Obama administration were circulating this kind of information widely, again with the purported intent of damaging Donald Trump and his associates.
I think our interest was, and the president's direction was, let us make sure that we have compiled and put together in one place all the information that we have, so that it is there for the new administration, it's there for the American people, and there for Congress to utilize as they see fit.
We only have about 15 seconds. Guy, do you think that James Comey can lead an impartial and fair investigation into this angle, the unmasking and leaking?
I think he can. I hope he does. And with all due respect to Ms. Rice, she is famous for lying on national television about Benghazi. So her credibility, I think, in the eyes of many Americans is shot.
Very quickly, A.B., do you agree with that?
I think that she lied when she was asked about this unmasking. She said she doesn't know anything about it. Well, you didn't play that actual clip, but she lied about this. Her credibility is shot, and I think James Comey, no matter what outcome is a result of this investigation, will have critics on at least one side because of the way he conducted himself last year.
That seems safe to say.
And welcome back to Hannity as we continue now with Eli Lake and Sarah Carter. All right, is there any indication that any of the unmasking requests of Susan Rice had to do with anything other than the incidental surveillance of Trump, transition members, associates, or is this just exclusively on Trump? Do we know, either one of you?
Well, I'd say at this point, we still have a lot of unanswered questions, and, you know, it would be interesting to find out if I'd like to hear from, I also reached out to Susan Rice, we'd like to hear from her exactly what her rationale was on all of this.
Why would we believe her? She went on 5 Sunday shows and lied repeatedly about Benghazi. How can you trust her?
Well, I still think that we should give the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we're making some serious accusations here. I'd like to hear her side of it. You're correct that on Benghazi, she gave the story about the internet video. But I would just kind of go back and I'd say that I think at the beginning of this investigation, and what we may end up finding out is that the law that allows the U.S. government to collect all this information and share it within the government needs to seriously be reformed, because it may turn out that all of what Susan Rice did was technically legal, but improper, if you will. And in that case, I think it would be a matter of reform. And I would just say this. I'm surprised that more Democrats and progressives have not taken this issue more seriously. Because if Barack Obama can do this to the Trump transition, then surely Donald Trump can do this to his own opposition. And that's something that ought to worry all Americans.
But it goes even deeper, Sarah, because her unmasking set the stage, if you will, for the leaking that took place. We know a felony was committed in the case of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. So, you know, why would they want to know all of these things? And maybe this was the whole false narrative thing that Evelyn Farkas was talking about, that a lot of people might have now known.
Yes, and I think we need those answers. I agree with Eli wholeheartedly on this. This is a civil liberties issue. It's huge. It deals with the Fourth Amendment.
It's also spying. Yeah, it's unreasonable search and seizure.
Exactly. And I think that there's something else. You know, a number of sources that I've spoken to about this, and, you know, none of us have access to those transcripts. Those are highly classified. But what we do know is what they've told us, They have nothing to do with Russia, apparently. And apparently there was no foreign intelligence value, according to people who have had access to this. So then they have to ask that question, and they have to answer those questions, right? Why were they looking at these transcripts?
Now, listen, you know what you're describing? You're describing, and maybe if they technically shifted the law without anybody paying attention, they seem to be using, under the guise of national security and legitimate surveillance, an opportunity to do something worse than Watergate, which is to spy on a presidential candidate, opposition party, and an incoming president, a president-elect, and his transition team. That's what it looks like to me. Does that look that way to you, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that they need to ask those questions. I think the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, and certainly in the case of the leaking of Michael Flynn's name, there needs to be a full investigation where people can be subpoenaed and a grand jury can be called.
Russia, it had nothing to do with it, and now we learn that this whole Russian conspiracy is a lie. True or false?
We don't know everything yet, Sean. But what we do know is as soon as we keep peeling this layer of this onion back, we'll get more and more answers.
We know there's
and the
no
American
evidence.
people.
We know there's no evidence of any collusion.
Yeah, we know. Well, we definitely know that the only evidence out there is that someone leaked very classified information and an American name regarding a classified transcript, and that was the law that was broken.
All right, I got to let you go.
Investigators in Russia now launching a terror investigation after today's deadly explosion in St. Petersburg. 10 people died. Dozens of others were hurt in the blast on board a subway train. Police later finding and defusing another explosive device at a subway station. It all comes as President Vladimir Putin is in the city today for a meeting with a foreign leader. Amy Kellogg is live in Milan with more on this. Amy.
Hi, Melissa. Well, the Interfax news agency, which is one of the premier news agencies in Russia, says that police are searching for 2 individuals right now. One who deposited that bomb that actually did go off, killing so many people in one of the cars of a subway underneath the seat, and then another for a bomb that didn't go off that was found further on a train further down the line, and there is a picture that is being circulated now of one of the people that police say they are looking for. We don't have a name as of yet. Of course, that wouldn't mean much to many people, but there is this image of someone police believe may have left that first bomb that did detonate underneath the seat of a subway car in St. Petersburg today. President Putin, meanwhile, has been careful not to refer to this specifically as a terrorist attack. He said that they are looking at all different lines of investigation, but the prosecutor's office in Russia has, in fact, opened a terrorism file, a terrorism case here, and clearly this has the hallmarks of a vicious premeditated terrorist attack. The blast went off between the Sennaya Ploshchad, in Russian, that would be Haymarket, and Technological Institute stations in central St. Petersburg. The door of the train was blown right off the carriage door. The conductor made the split-second decision to keep driving after the blast to the next station, and people are praising that decision after the fact because it made the evacuation of the wounded that much easier. The St. Petersburg subway system is extremely deep. St. Petersburg is a city of canals, and also this system was used as a bomb shelter during World War II. And as I mentioned earlier, another unexploded homemade bomb was found at another subway station at Revolution Square about an hour after the explosion occurred. It contained, Melissa, 2 pounds of explosives. So if it had gone off, it would have had 5 times the impact of that first bomb, which was so deadly and killed 10 people and injured so many others. Again, President Putin, this is his hometown, St. Petersburg. He was there today for a meeting with Alexander Lukashenko, who's the president of Belarus. They were sort of off having discussions most of the day, so we really didn't hear from him. 3 days of mourning begin tomorrow in St. Petersburg, and of course, Russia has been hit with terrorist attacks in the past, Melissa, but most commonly in Moscow, sometimes in some of the further flung regions or those closer to the Caucasus where Chechnya is. This is the first time I can recall hearing about one in St. Petersburg, which has always been Russia's city with a window onto the West, its most European city. And finally, one last thing to add to this. I did watch one Russian media station that was criticizing Western media for suggesting this was blowback for actions in Syria. Melissa.
Amy Kellogg, thank you.
Welcome back to Hannity. So the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that Judge Neil Gorsuch will be confirmed this week, but many Senate Democrats, they're vowing to block this from happening by any means necessary. Now, this could lead to a very bitter and unprecedented confirmation showdown, and that's tonight's mini monologue. All right, way back in 2013, when Democrats had control of the Senate and President Obama was in the White House, well, then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, well, he changed long-standing Senate precedents and eliminated the 60-vote threshold that is needed for the confirmation of Obama nominees. And for 3 years after that, many Senate Democrats argued that this precedent of an up or down vote should be applied to all appointments, including Obama's Supreme Court nomination of Merrick Garland. You may remember this.
We'd much prefer the risk of up or down votes in majority rule than the risk of continued total obstruction. That's the bottom line, no matter who's in power.
We need to call out these filibusters for what they are. Naked attempts to nullify the results of the last presidential election. If Republicans continue to filibuster these highly qualified nominees for no reason other than to nullify the president's constitutional authority, then senators not only have the right to change the filibuster rules, senators have a duty to change the filibuster rules.
We should be giving this person a hearing and an up or down vote. To not do so is violative of the United States Constitution.
All right, now the tables are turned. Republicans are in control of the Senate and the White House, and while the confirmation of Judge Neil Gorsuch hangs in the balance, the hypocrisy of Senate Democrats is on full display. Listen to what Senate Minority Leader Chucky Schumer had to say just last month.
I have concluded that I cannot support Judge Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court. His nomination will have a cloture vote. He will have to earn 60 votes for confirmation. My vote will be no, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. To my Republican friends who think that if Judge Gorsuch fails to reach 60 votes, we ought to change the rules, I say if this nominee cannot earn 60 votes, a bar met by each of President Obama's nominees and George Bush's last two nominees, the answer isn't to change the rules, it's to change the nominee.
Now, this obstruction comes on the heels of an impressive performance by Judge Gorsuch during the confirmation hearings where Democrats tried and failed to smear President Trump's Supreme Court pick. They didn't land a punch. Now, Senate Democrats are vowing to use, well, the last option of obstruction that's available, the filibuster. Now, currently, only 4 Democrats are promising to oppose the filibuster, and that means that such a filibuster is highly possible, and Republicans will be left with one option: to invoke the nuclear option or the constitutional option and extend Harry Reid's 50-vote threshold for the first time ever to a Supreme Court nominee. Joining us now.
The Senate Judiciary Committee has sent the nomination of President Trump's Supreme Court pick to the full Senate. That sets up what is shaping up as at least a week of debate, conflict, and possibly an unprecedented change in the way the Senate does business. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill tonight. Good evening, Mike.
James, good evening. No sign of a deal to avert a partisan filibuster, and Senate Republicans are determined to fill the Scalia vacancy.
Hannity. As expected, the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch was approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee 11-9 along party lines. The Judiciary Chairman, Republican Chuck Grassley, said Gorsuch deserves confirmation.
He's a picture of the kind of justice we should have on the Supreme Court.
The panel's top Democrat rejected that pitch.
Unfortunately, based on Judge Gorsuch's record at the Department of Justice, his tenure on the bench, his appearance before the Senate, and his written questions for the record, I cannot support this nomination.
Democrats expressed their anger over the treatment Judge Merrick Garland received, who was nominated but never considered last year. My conscience will not allow me to ratify the majority leader's actions.
Not last year, not this year. I will not, I cannot support advancing this nomination.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham said it was wrong to take it out on Judge Gorsuch.
It says more about the Senate than it does Judge Gorsuch.
After Feinstein, Leahy, and Virginia Senator Mark Warner said they were voting no today, Delaware Senator Chris Coons became the 41st Democrat, enough to sustain a filibuster.
I will be voting against cloture unless we are able, as a body, to finally sit down and find a way to avoid the nuclear option.
There was a clash when Texas Senator Ted Cruz suggested this is pure politics.
It is the action of a handful of left-wing billionaires spending money to organize activists on the ground that are in effect holding Democratic senators hostage.
The Democrats are afraid of being primaried. Please.
Democrats warned Republicans will pay.
This has been building up for years. All I can say is what goes around comes around.
Top Republicans say they were forced into this position, making the case Democrats would not have accepted any judge picked by President Trump. And Utah Senator Orrin Hatch blasted Democrats.
It's pathetic that they're so stupid that they pick somebody of his quality and ability. We have no alternative other than to do what has to be done here.
One conservative tried to reassure the American people.
Today is a good day for America. Baseball is back, and Judge Gorsuch is one step closer to taking his seat on the Supreme Court.
There is very little goodwill between the two parties in the Senate these days, but several lawmakers have thrown out the idea of perhaps a deal facing the threat of the nuclear option. James?
And Mike, on a separate issue, after the president's preferred bill for the repeal and replacement of Obamacare collapsed last month, we had heard that that effort was essentially dead on the operating room table. Now we hear it might have a pulse after all. What can you tell us?
That's right. And some sources here on Capitol Hill are cautiously optimistic. It's clear there have been back-channel conversations between the White House, conservatives in the Freedom Caucus, and some House leadership types. One idea being thrown out there is allowing governors to opt out of some of the Obamacare regulations to see if that may bring some of the conservatives on board. I'm told that the golf outing between President Trump and Senator Rand Paul may have helped. But bottom line, some of those who are very close to the crafting this bill are taking a cautious approach, essentially telling us, let us know when the Freedom Caucus guys sign up. James?
As you know, Mike, a lot of important business takes place over golf. Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. Thank you.
Bloomberg View, Eli Lake from CircaNews.com, Sarah Carter. Eli, let's start with you. Welcome to the program. All right, so incidental surveillance. This is what Devin Nunes was talking about. Okay, but what bothered him? Now we find out Susan Rice seemingly is purposely unmasking the names of people, but only Trump transition team's member, or maybe even then candidate Trump, what those conversations were if they were picked up, quote, incidentally. Why is that dangerous, and why should the American people understand the seriousness of this?
Well, I want to just stress that I don't know other things that she requested to be unmasked, but the way I understand this is that the National Security Council staffer who was brought in for Trump, who was doing a review of the unmasking policy, noticed an anomaly in the patterns of requests from Susan Rice to unmask the names that were incidentally collected in summaries of basically raw intelligence of monitored communications. That was then discovered by the staffer, whose name has been out there. He then takes that to the General Counsel's office in the White House, who then look into this some more and have tried to make this available to first Devin Nunes, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, but also Adam Schiff, the ranking member of that committee, and they've also offered this to the Senate Intelligence Committee.
All right, and Sarah, so why would Susan Rice, especially as it relates to everything that we have been talking about, take incidental surveillance and ask, this is raw intelligence, ask for the unmasking, but only seemingly in the case of the Trump transition team, or perhaps even Trump as a candidate? How dangerous is that when the White House, an administration, a sitting administration, is surveilling and using legitimate surveillance to basically surveil on an opposition party?
Sean, it's extremely concerning because I think those are the questions that need to be asked directly of Susan Rice. I attempted to reach out to her a number of times just to ask her those exact same questions, but she did not return my phone calls.
Shocking.
But what I want to step back, because what we're looking at is not just the expansion. Remember last week, Sean, you and I discussed this. 702, Section 702 of the 12333 executive order is supposed to protect Americans from being unmasked. But if we go back to the stories that we wrote last week, in 2011, that was expanded. The FISA court signed off under the Obama administration to allow for more leniency in unmasking. So it wasn't like, it's almost as if it was legalized without us knowing it. And so the unmasking was allowed to occur. So in 2011, then in 2015, they relaxed the laws even more. So what they were able to do is, and we know it went to Susan Rice. We know former CIA Director John Brennan was allowed to do this, and Clapper. So they had the ability to request unmasked American intercept,
raw intelligence,
foreign to foreign, raw intelligence,
that
highly
should never
classified.
have, even if it was legitimate intelligence gathering, they're basically using that as a means to spy on innocent Americans without the benefit of a warrant. Good way to put it?
And that's certainly, yes, and that's certainly what intelligence sources are saying. They're saying, look, this isn't just about just the unmasking. It's about why did they specifically unmask Susan Rice in particular at this point from July, right? We're going all the way back to July.
What could be the logical reason short of they wanted to use legitimate intelligence gathering as a ruse to get to the Trump transition team and maybe even candidate Trump if it goes back to July?
If it goes back to July, these are the questions they have to ask. And according to the sources that I've spoken with, it goes back to July. It happened again in November, and then it happened exponentially after November through January. So they were looking at this. Other sources that we've spoken to just recently, as of today, have said to us, and these are high-level senior intelligence sources, said these questions need to be asked. Now, they could have been looking at it because some sources are saying,
but, standard operating procedure is you do not identify the identity of an American because you don't have a warrant for that surveillance. Standard operating procedures, when you're writing up a report, they would usually put in American and identify nobody. But in this specific cases, we have Susan Rice asking for the names of those people. More with Eli and Sarah right after this break.
Let's dive deeper into both of our top stories today with our senior political analyst, Britt Hume. Britt, let's start with Judge Gorsuch. What lesson should Americans watching at home draw from this, the fact that we're now on the precipice of a filibuster here?
Well, what I would say about this, James, is that Supreme Court confirmation battles have been raw politics and raw power exercises, basically, with some exceptions, going back to Judge Bork back during the Reagan administration. And this is a function, James, of the fact that the Supreme Court and the lower courts as well are so deeply now enmeshed in our life and in what a lot of conservatives consider legislating from the bench. And it means a lot now in a way that perhaps judicial decisions didn't used to our national life. And so these Supreme Court nominations have become extremely politically sensitive, with each side fighting bitterly to try to get its type of nominees on the court and to keep the other sides off. And this just represents the playing out of that, and it now appears that the filibuster for Supreme Court justices will be eliminated as a consequence of this battle.
And Britt, you've covered a lot of major stories in your 5 decades as a leading reporter. How significant is this revelation about Ambassador Susan Rice and the unmasking?
Well, I think it changes the atmosphere quite a bit, and it makes it clear that there is a legitimate case here to be investigated by the committees that are looking into this whole intelligence, Russia, Trump connection, and the rest of it. And some Republicans have been suggesting for some time that there is an aspect to this, maybe not what Trump said exactly about him being surveilled or wiretapped, but there's something here. This indicates that indeed there may be. Now, it doesn't prove it, it doesn't establish it finally, but it certainly indicates that there's something to be investigated here, because Susan Rice, as John Roberts' report pointed out, has a considerable reputation here. She has always been quite political, and if she was trying to get this information on, who these people were, whose names were caught up in surveillance of foreign officials, that is something that is going to have to be investigated. She'll probably have to testify, and so we now have an investigation that is very much on 2 tracks now, despite despite efforts on at least one side to say that really there's only the Trump-Russia matter, there are now two matters, that and this.
Well, the unmasking in and of itself, Britt, might seem innocuous, but for the fact that we know of at least one apparent felony in this whole sequence of events, which is the leaking of transcript data resulting from one of these foreign surveillance collection efforts against General Flynn. Now, the FBI director has confirmed he's investigating alleged contacts between Trump World and the Russian government, but he was more circumspect, James Comey, in his testimony before Congress as to whether he's investigating that leak as a potential crime.
Yeah, he was, but one has to presume that he is indeed investigating. He certainly should be if he's investigating the rest of it. So I presume he'll be looking into this, and perhaps she would be asked to testify to the FBI as well. I would think she would be questioned for sure. So we'll see about that. But James, I think what we clearly have here now is an investigation that has two parallel tracks. And at this point, they're both about of equal political significance. So each side now has something to talk about that, and I don't know whether that will increase or reduce the level of the volume on these controversies, but there certainly now are two.
And we'll be covering it all right here on Fox News. Britt Hume, thank you from Florida.
Here with reaction is Fox News senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge,
morning.
did she do anything illegal here?
It depends on what she did with the information that she unmasked. She is entitled to this. She, as the president's national security advisor, has the highest level of national security clearance. So if General Flynn is talking to the Russian ambassador and that conversation is recorded, is surveilled, because the government wants to know what the Russian ambassador is saying to whomever he's speaking, and she needs to know to whom the ambassador was speaking in order to understand the conversation, she can do that. Can she reveal the identity of the American for a purpose other than national security? Absolutely not. Can she ask for more Americans involved and then unmask them and say to her boss, by the way, guess what Trump and Manafort were talking about last night? You know what that's called? That's called espionage. That's called the failure to safeguard top secret information. The identity of Americans incidentally caught up in otherwise lawful surveillance is protected by the top secret protection, the highest level of classification of secrets that we have. This is the same crime that Hillary Clinton probably committed by her failure to safeguard top secret information when she was Secretary of State.
This is very troubling, because if you use the apparatus of the intel community to do something bad to your political opponents or to surveil them for political advantage, that is everything that FISA was not supposed to be.
Correct. It's also hacking and it's espionage. Each time it's done. So the FBI must examine this, and she must be challenged as to why she needed this information and what she did with it. She only had one boss. She only reported to one person. We all know who that was. That was the President of the United States.
Right, and reportedly, a lot of these conversations had nothing to do, or actually none of the stuff somebody saw, according to sources in the press today, had to do with Russia. So there's no national security interest.
If there's no national security involvement, then she has no right to examine it, and she has no right to reveal it, even if the revelation is not in public,
Judge, don't you
even
know
if the revelation is in private.
She's going to get away with this, though, right? She can always say she did have a national security interest because they were checking to see if he was colluding with Russia.
You know,
that's all she has to say, and she gets away with it, right?
Well, no. She can say what she wants, but the FBI, when they're investigating this, should challenge her as to whether or not what she's saying is true. Right. Think about what happened. The President of the United States and his national security advisor were obtaining transcripts of the President-elect and his potential national security advisor and other transcripts. Could you imagine if George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice had done this to President-elect Obama? The political earthquake would still be palpable.
And now maybe we know what Trump was talking about in that tweet.
I think we do.
Maybe some Democrats will come out against this as well.
I'm waiting for them.
Yeah.
We'll see.
All right, Judge, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's dial in Laura Ingraham. You know her. She runs LifeZette.
No hugs for you today because you are a woman.
Well, she's via satellite today. Hey, Laura, you've got a newspaper there. I'm just curious. What page is the Susan Wright was the unmasker story
Well,
on?
this is the Washington Compost, and we got the Trump donor met Putin ally. You guys can zero in on this. Democrats are ready to filibuster Gorsuch.
Yeah.
Sessions orders review of police reform pact.
Where's the Susan Rice story?
You know, I've been flipping. There's a story about a dog that was rescued from a. No, I'm just.
And check the one.
I mean, every manner of story, but I can't find any story about Susan Rice.
Brian
It must be
found
here
it on
somewhere.
A16. Was that in the Times?
Oh, yeah, the
New York
Times. It tells you the headline. The headline's even just said, Steve, could you grab the New York Times there? Right.
I can't find it in the Washington Post at all. Susan, I mean, because I'm sure if I'm sure if someone like Condi Rice or any of the national security team of George W. Bush had spied on Barack Obama,
right. It would be front page.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be a story or anything for the Washington Post. I mean, it's so shameless.
In the New York Times, the headline on page A16, Trump tries to deflect Russia scrutiny, citing a crooked scheme by Obama.
Guys, this is such a low point for the American media. I mean, they have been pounding the Russia story for weeks, even though top officials have said they have no evidence that any Russia involvement in our election or attempt to meddle in the election had any effect. Okay, they stay on that story. Fine, we should find out what Russia wanted to do to the election. Fine. But now we have a close confidant of both Hillary Clinton, who was running against Donald Trump, and Barack Obama, the same woman who went out on 4 Sunday shows and lied about the attack on Benghazi. She was that trusted and that relied upon that they sent her out to sell that lie endlessly on television. This very same person just decides one day, I want to unmask all these identities of people from these particular phone numbers in raw intel reports. Now, did she do all of that on her own? What did Barack Obama know, and when did he know it? And who in the Obama administration directed Susan Rice to do this? Or was she just acting alone? There's an aggressive lack of curiosity on the part of the lamestream media on all of this.
She has said through intermediaries that she did nothing wrong. And if you watch the mainstream media, that's what they say. They say she did nothing wrong, and in her capacity, she could do that. But if none of the conversations were about Russia, why would she need to unmask this information about the Trump team? It looks political.
Well, it very well might have been legal. That's a separate problem that we have with our surveillance culture in Washington. Should this be legal? I think we'll have to find out more about what she actually did.
If it's fine between Americans, no.
Yeah, exactly. And also, if the sole purpose of unmasking was to just kind of find out what they were talking about and kind of find out how they were going to change Obama's policies or how they were going to proceed on various domestic policy fronts or foreign policy fronts, if it had very little to do with national security, then we are on the verge in this country of living with police state tactics. This is what police states do to their political opponents. They surveil and they report back to headquarters. I lived in the former Soviet Union for a semester in college. This is the kind of stuff I witnessed as a 20-year-old in Leningrad, okay? And no, I'm not part of the Russian conspiracy because I speak Russian and have 2 Russian sons, okay? But this is the kind of stuff I witnessed there. Now, we'll learn more. We'll see why she did all this, I hope. But for the mainstream media to push this Eric Prince Blackwater story above the fold and leave this to, some jump page somewhere else in the publication is beyond shameless. We know exactly what side they're on here.
Laura, just 2 weeks ago, though, she was on PBS saying she didn't know anything about this. Listen.
Yeah. I know nothing about this. I was surprised to see reports from Chairman Nunes on that count today. I really don't know to what Chairman Nunes was referring, but he said that whatever he was referring to was a legal, lawful surveillance, and that it was potentially incidental collection.
What this does is shed a lot of light on what Devin Nunes was seeing when he went over a couple of weeks ago in a mystifying move that we still don't have all the answers to, but maybe he's seeing some of this. And my question is, where's this going? I have a sense we're not done with this. She had dozens of requests to unmask the American citizen at the other end of the alleged international call. Why is that? Are the reasons sound? And Could you perhaps be interested to that level of our own? Is it of your national security? You thought our national security was actually at risk to do that? Let's say that's true. But how do you possibly rationalize if it turns out two Americans are talking and those names are exposed? Adam Schiff didn't come out and said, I saw that information and I think it's no big deal. He declined to discuss the contents of the report, but he said it was highly unusual for Devin Nunes to see it without him there first, which means he probably might have been very blown away by what he saw.
Right. That's a great insight, Brian. And I think that John McCain this morning said it was a dereliction of duty on the part of Susan Rice. I mean, pretty much McCain criticizes the Trump team for everything. So the fact that even he came out today and hit her on this. But I still go back to, was Susan Rice acting alone here in her request for this information? Again, it might have been legal. But was there a concerted effort to discover as much information as possible on the incoming administration for future use in politics, in other investigations that might not even have been going on? What were they looking for? And who else did she discuss this unmasking with? And her little comment, by the way, where she said, oh, well, this could have been about incidental collection. You know, you've had these same former intel people on your show, guys. I mean, that's irrelevant. Right. Whether it was incidental or not, if she had a political motive for doing what she did, that is reprehensible. It could be unlawful. And more investigation needs to go on about this. But, I mean, what's closer to the truth? That Obama ordered a wiretap of Trump Tower? What's closer to truth? That or Susan Rice saying, I know nothing about this?
Well,
what's closer to the truth?
What if the roles were reversed? What if it were the Trump team surveilling Hillary Clinton's team? That would be all over the front page.
Or George W. Bush's team surveilling Barack Obama. That would be probably the analogy I would stick with. I mean, they'd be screaming bloody murder.
Remember the good old days when they just stole a letter from a typewriter, like W? Remember they just took the W's? Those were the scandals back in the 90s during the transition.
And they would, if George W. Bush's national security advisor had been doing this, they would also pull in the race card. They would be saying they're doing this because they're racist. I mean, honestly, this story must be focused in the right way. The Russia investigation will go forward fine. I don't think there's anything there, and we're going to find that. But this story about Susan Rice, given her past, is explosive. And I hope journalists at the Washington Post start doing their job.
And when you click around and you see nobody's talking about it on the other channels, it tells you a lot about those channels. Real quickly, because you worked at the Supreme Court back in the day after you lived in Russia, it looks like Neil Gorsuch is going to get the job for life on Friday. But the Republicans at this point are poised to invoke the nuclear option, get rid of the filibuster. It looks on its face like Democrats are doing about the dumbest thing they possibly could.
Yeah, exactly right. They're shooting themselves in their own foot. I don't like calling it the nuclear option. This is actually what has constitutionally always been the case. There's never been a filibuster, partisan filibuster, of a Supreme Court nominee. Never. We all know that. Chuck Schumer and the Democrats took the first step down the road of ending that long Senate tradition by what they did on the lower courts, the federal appellate courts. And now, you know, now they're eating crow on this. But it's not McConnell's not doing anything out of the ordinary. He really isn't. He's merely keeping in place the long-standing tradition that filibusters of a partisan nature do not prevent an up or down vote on a Supreme Court nomination. And that's what's going to happen. Justice Thomas, for whom I clerked, was not filibustered, even though there was a lot of controversy surrounding his nomination, never filibustered. So why should someone be filibustered now?
Well, because it's the time we're in, and finally, is health care back? Do you get the sense that they're getting off on the right foot this time?
I do.
It looks like they're going to make an announcement today. What do you hear?
I've been hearing this for days, and my sources on Capitol Hill, with whom I've been speaking, have said this. There is a concerted effort to get this done and do it the right way. I think not everybody's going to get everything they want, but this is critical for moving forward on tax reform. Donald Trump needs this win on the board, and so do the Republicans. They've got to work together on this, bring down the cost of health care, and get back toward the road of real competition in health care.
So Freedom Caucus will be on board. What are they saying?
I think a number of the Freedom Caucus members will be on board. Maybe not everybody, but that's okay. That's the process.
Rand Paul met with them over the weekend, and he was the liaison, they say.
That's
and last night, the vice president was to have a late-night meeting on Capitol Hill.
So if
Great,
Trump
they should be working. Don't you think they all should be working overtime? Don't take the 2-week Easter break. I think everybody should be staying in town getting this job done. And until they get it done, they shouldn't be going for any Easter recess.
Well, if Trump gets health care this week and Gorsuch, it will be his best week.
It's a great week for him if that happens, absolutely.
Yeah, and the headline will be something else. Laura Ingraham, always great to see you. We
Great
wore you
to see you guys.
16.
Continuing now with our lead story, hatred of the president disrupting the republic, in my opinion. Joining us from Austin, Texas, Marjorie Clifton, a Democrat. So, do you acknowledge the hatred in your party against President Trump?
Well, I don't even know that it's party specific. And I think there are a lot of people that have strong emotions related to him because he's done a lot of things that evoke emotional responses. Like you talked about with the wall, comments he's made about women. Those have hit chords that go beyond just politics. But when it comes to things like the hearing that we're talking about, I actually think that's separate. And what is, like you talked about, the base being fired up, that's going to energize politicians who have to go back and run their elections after they place their vote. So
look,
does that influence? Yeah, it influences.
There may be some of that, but believe me, we did a survey. People don't follow the Supreme Court like that. They don't know who Neil Gorsuch is. They don't watch the hearings. We're talking about the general folks here, not people who watch the O'Reilly Factor. This is a good man, Gorsuch. You would see that, right? Honorable man?
He seems such. I mean, and I agree that this may not be the food fight that it would be worth in a different climate.
Okay, so he's a good man, and his record on the bench is stellar. It's a stellar record. And then when he was appointed to the lower court, all the Democrats went along with it. Okay? So now they don't. And it's not because of Gorsuch, it's because of Trump. They don't want to give Trump the big win. And it will be a big win for Trump on Friday. You know it will be. But here's what I don't understand, and maybe you can explain this to me. They know Gorsuch is going to get confirmed one way or the other. So now they're just being obstructionists. They're just being, you know, I don't care if he's qualified. I don't care if he's got a good record. I'm not going to vote for him, period. Don't you think that's going to tee off independent Americans?
Well, I think independent Americans have already been spurred, but I think this goes beyond just feelings about the president. It's about fairness, and how the president has been operating has felt wholly unfair to people who are part of the political process.
But that doesn't have anything to do with Gorsuch. So you're making my point. You're saying they want to punish Trump because they don't think he's fair. So we'll punish him no matter what he does.
No, I'm making the same point Charles made, which it is politics, and that they've got to go back and see to their base in their districts who are fired up because of the policies of this what seemingly Republican administration.
They don't care about the Supreme Court. That's not a major issue. It's going to get Claire McCaskill defeated, but it's not a major issue.
But they do care about when, for example, him trying to undermine the entire judicial system, saying so-called judges. And I think the need for fairness.
That's just an offhand comment.
People.
It's an offhand comment.
But the number of but the pettiness that we have seen from Trump, his taking to Twitter, the things that seem unfair, and the fact that
because you consider him petty, and some liberals, so that we're going to we're going to oppose anything that he does. That's exactly my point. You're making my point for me.
No,
Thank you.
But another point I'd also make is I don't think that Democrats and Republicans alike feel that Gorsuch's, the way he rules on different subject matter is exactly super fair. So that is, I mean, I don't think that's a universal truth. But even more not fair was the fact that when the Democrats put Judge Garland up in a completely fair, they refused.
Now.
No, it's not, because they refused to give him a trial at all.
It doesn't matter what happened with Garland if you have a good guy now that could help the country. Last word.
But it does. I think it is about fairness.
So payback's good for the Republic? Come on.
No, it is about who's going to be a unifier, and Trump is not being a unifier. And I think finding ways to bring people together, to feel like we are part of a process everyone honors, is a key impartial thing. And I'm with Charles even on the nationals all the way around.
But you made my point for me. They don't like him, so anything he does, they're not going to cooperate.
No.
Well, Fox News political analyst Juan Williams was just talking to me off camera, so I didn't see the teleprompter. He just wrote an article in which he says the chances President Trump leaves office prematurely through impeachment or resignation keep going up. He says Republicans are in no hurry to defend Trump given his low approval numbers, while evidence the Trump campaign colluded with Russia supposedly increases every day. Dun, dun, dun. Williams also boldly says Democrats have made themselves look apolitical in recent months, which presumably will give them moral authority if they actually attempt to impeach Trump. You'll have to read the rest of it for the rest of it. Juan joins us now. Great to see you, Juan.
Thank you so much, Chuck.
So he's been there like 20 minutes, and already you're impeaching him. When are you guys voting?
Right. I'm not impeaching him. I'm just telling you, though, from the political point of view, you look at the poll numbers right now. There was a really intriguing poll last week by a left-leaning group, and it said that if people believe that Russia was involved in colluding with the Trump campaign, about half of them say Trump should either resign or be impeached. And then the second shoe was, oh, guess what? 44%, about half of them believe that Russia was involved. So these are people who are ready for resignation, impeachment already. And as you know, his most recent poll numbers have more than 50%.
But that's based on a hypothetical question. I mean, if Trump turns out to be responsible for sinking the Lusitania, I would think he could get impeached as well. I mean, there are a lot of, right? So, I mean, the problem with predicating anything like this on the poll numbers is that when it comes to Trump, polls are not just wrong, but like they're unbelievably wrong. They're historically spectacularly wrong.
Well, up to a point. I mean, they can be spectacularly wrong in estimating the depth of his support. But look at the reality on the political ground. I think in the last week we've had some instruction from the Republican side, and I think that's really where you got to focus. It's not the Democrats have the power, but remember, when you start looking at Republicans like Freedom Caucus moving away and saying, you know what, this guy can't punish me in my district, that tells you something about what the polls are showing in those districts.
But I wonder, okay, so the truth, as you know, is that Trump is not a conventional Republican at all, and that his views, his political views, are not in line with those of a lot of Republicans in the House of Representatives.
Correct.
The question is, who represents more actual voters? Donald Trump or an individual member of Congress? I mean, it's like not even close.
Right.
So do they have the power to destroy the Trump presidency? I'm not sure they do.
Well, that's the question. Here's the thing. A lot of Republicans fear that they will be maligned as having undercut the Trump presidency if they give in to anything that looks like, you know, we think there's a serious problem here with Russia. So they're reluctant to do that because they don't want anybody to say, you know what, you're the one, you're the traitor who turned on the man we elected president. As you point out, he's got nationwide support. But right now, they're also very much in touch with the idea that Flynn's asking for immunity, Carter Page, Roger Stone, all these people, I'm going to come testify. And they're very aware that the tide may be shifting, and they don't want to get caught in the underdraft and pushed out and have the Republican brand damaged by the Trump presidency.
But see, here's what I find so striking. You've got two stories unfolding in parallel.
Right.
On the one side, you have the allegation that Trump coordinated with the Russian government, for which there's precisely no evidence at all. There's not one scintilla of evidence. On the other side, you have Trump's claim that he was surveilled by the Obama administration.
Right.
Okay? Which may not be strictly speaking accurate, but there is actual evidence that there was, in fact, surveillance of Trump and his associates during the campaign and the transition. Of Trump? No, today reported that Trump and people in his orbit were caught up in surveillance.
Caught up. So that's an important distinction to make for the audience. That it's that they're caught up as the U.S. government was legitimately and legally pursuing surveillance of Russians.
But that's the thing. Why are we assuming all of a sudden that this surveillance was both legitimate and legal? I mean, my assumption is that all of it's legal.
Yeah.
But why would it? Because everything is legal. The government does.
No,
it is. Nobody ever goes.
Are you kidding? No.
Did Lois Lerner go to jail?
I don't know that what she did was illegal.
No,
that's your assumption. But I will say this, that when you have the FBI director come before the Congress and say, I'm involved in an investigation, and say no evidence that President Obama ever wiretapped or surveilled Donald Trump, I think to myself, well, if this was illegal activity, he certainly would point that out.
Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I don't even because I think the FBI director's public behavior is bizarre. And I think anybody watching, I thought his revealing the investigation to Hillary during the campaign was bizarre. The whole thing is bizarre. But in one sentence, don't you think someone in the White House, before Susan Rice unmasked the names, would have said, hey, Susan Rice, in the middle of a presidential campaign, maybe you shouldn't do that?
Well, wait a second. Remember, if this is true that she unmasked the name, there are legitimate reasons that she wants to know who the Russians are talking about or talking to in order to determine what is going on and affect the national security interests of the United States. She was a legitimate
Well, there might have been. There might have also been illegitimate reasons.
Well, that I don't know, but I can see that you like the conspiracy theory.
It's not a conspiracy. It actually happened.
But no, but she didn't. There's no proof that it's illegal or she did something wrong.
Highly unethical to me. Okay. Juan Williams, come back.
I appreciate it, Tucker. Thank you.